Goku versus Gojo. Honestly, I was sort of avoiding this for quite some time because I didn't want this to just be a Saitama situation where we kept just saying, well, based on what we know, this is what Gojo can probably do, but maybe more. It was always pretty boring to do that, but now that we've seen, spoilers, a lot of Gojo versus Sukuna, this is pretty much cut and dry on what we can expect from him. Just like when Saitama eventually faces off against Cosmic Garo and showed us more of his power. This topic also seems to go through the recycling bin on Twitter or wherever else all the time and is constantly regurgitated and discussed, so I thought I'd finally answer it myself and end the conversation. Let me teach you guys everything you need to know about Goku versus Gojo. While I do have some new things to say about Goku and Gojo in this video, the first thing you gotta always address when having any type of cross-verse debate with characters that have strange energies or abilities is, can these guys even interact with each other to begin with? More importantly, can Goku even touch Gojo through Limitless to begin with? Because if he can't, then what's the point of even having this conversation? Then we also have to address, can Goku fight Gojo since he has no cursed energy, where cursed energy tends to have negative effects on those that simply don't have it. Those not having it having no resistance to it, sort of like a poison or a plague in certain instances. So would Son just sort of instantly rot away and just die or something near Gojo? Obviously, pretty important details to start up the conversation. As I talked about in a few of my videos so far, Limitless is a highly complex ability where Gojo manipulates an engine called Infinity to manipulate space to his whims. However, it's a bit more complicated than just normal spatial manipulation, and where he seems to apply mathematical concepts to space to achieve goals. To put it in the simplest terms, to avoid a 15-minute lecture like I did in Kakashi versus Gojo, he can manipulate the distance between he and his opponent by changing space between them, slowing them down due to the massive changes in distance until they appear frozen, or think of having to literally traverse an infinite amount of points to reach a destination after a certain distance to Gojo in its more extreme forms. I'll go over obviously this more complex mathematical breakdown once again in Kakashi vs. Gojo, which I do recommend, but I'm trying to avoid the full lecture again. In JJK, a universe where Mach 3 is considered immensely fast by most combatants, and electricity is pretty much undodgeable except by like 5 people, it's no shock that nobody would ever be able to budge Limitless whatsoever that isn't a top tier, making Gojo look pretty much omnipotent. To get through Limitless, you have to do a few things, I would say, that would make you pretty concretely or at least convincingly above it. A, surpassing infinite speed, or B, having attacks that ignore space-time, or can slice through space-time infinitely. Obviously, with example A, if you're above infinite speed, Gojo condensing space between you and him wouldn't really matter too much. You would also probably warp through space anyway at infinite speed. If you ignore space-time with your attacks, in scenario B, then Gojo condensing space might as well be condensing something that provides nothing of value between he and you that'd hinder you from hitting him in any capacity. A good example of what B would look like if you need an image is look at what Mahagara.
Alright, so since Seth is pushing 50 and is losing his ability to speak properly, he asked me to pronounce a name for him, specifically Maharaga, also known as Makora, but no one calls him that.
Did when he actually adapted to said Limitless and his attacks just chopped through it and cut Gojo's arm off. Obviously this is a bit different than what I'm talking about, but the ignoring aspect would be very similar. For veterans, you already know that Goku possessed both those qualities and beyond. He could be argued to output above infinite speed and burst, and has attacks that ignore space-time to an infinite degree. In terms of speed, we know Goku in just his base form can move around in a void that has no time and space whatsoever when he goes to fetch Zeno 2 after he nukes a timeline out of existence. In the manga, it is just blatantly no longer existent as the ring representing it vanishes, and the anime is a bit more ambiguous, but it obviously is conceptually pretty similar, as Zeno obliterates this timeline to destroy Fusion or Mugen Zamasu, Infinite Zamasu, who was fusing with the time-space of the multiverse itself. Goku shows he can function in this void rather easily and carefree, and even if you want to argue maybe Toriyama and Toyotaro, the authors of these scenes, didn't really think of this too much, as power scalers we kinda just have to take it as it is, as cringe as that sounds. Goku and just Ultra Instinct Omen, which he surpasses by millions of times over by current Super, which I outline in many videos on my channel, which will pop up on the screen now, had enough energy to vibrate and shake an entire infinite void, meaning his energy and aura not only expanded infinitely, almost instantly, but could move and vibrate in the depths of the void that had no space-time as well, further reinforcing what Goku actually did earlier. He also has a few mentions where he can be argued above instantaneous movement, such as when Kid Buu blows up a planet faster than people can instantly teleport to the Supreme Kai planet, and where characters traverse the infinitely sized universe in finite times with raw speed, and even fighting a guy while he's in the middle of skipping through time. As for interacting with time and space, this is a no-brainer. Goku and Beerus simply punching each other was going to turn a macrocosm, multiple infinite universes in size, into a void of nothing, with nothing remaining, and even during the Buu saga when characters could get obliterated by Mastered Ultra Instinct's mere presence alone, could scream so hard it was ripping holes into space that were going to collapse the entire infinite universe with alternate dimensions by making a hole as big as the universe in space. By the time we get to things like Dragon Ball Super Broly, these characters can just punch so hard they shatter through space-time and fly into other dimensions on accident while not even remotely near full power. And most of the time when they don't do this, it's because they're hindering their powers or they're restricting it, or it would kind of dilute the plot and the flow of the scenes if they just always broke into other dimensions all the time. Goku also interacts with attacks that can annihilate space, time, and even your causal and spiritual existence itself by fighting Hawkeye attacks from Gods of Destruction in his base form, and later on completely surpassing them. Even the infinite Zamasu that was fusing with the space-time of the multiverse is then stated to be weaker than a heavily suppressed Jiren, who Mastered Ultra Instinct Goku can ragdoll like he's a random. That being said, cutting through space and time is not really a problem at all for Goku, and it's probably in fact one of the most consistent things about Dragon Ball, all things considered. That being said, you can make a very decent argument for Goku being able to punch through Limitless, especially by current Dragon Ball Super standards. What I gave you was just a few examples. You could honestly make whole videos dedicated to these topics alone. One of those in particular being my 6-hour How Strong is Goku video. Yeah, be sure just to peep that right after this. I'd really appreciate it. The next important point, obviously, is cursed energy poisoning non-cursed users, or non-cursed users having no resistance. Well, we know that characters in Dragon Ball have existence and spiritual resistances, as well as auras that can block out most hexes. The time frame for cursed energy negging a non-cursed user one is debatable. One of the few examples we get of this is a curse eating Maki's leg earlier in Jujutsu Kaisen, which even that isn't instant or something, nor is Maki just BFO'd whenever she's just near a curse. She can obviously face them with curse tools and so forth while struggling to break the sound barrier, let alone Goku, who's infinitely above space and time. One counterpoint that I would like to kind of flesh out and get out of the way for Condition B is that there is a character from the Sendai 4 Clash of the Culling games from Jujutsu Kaisen, Uro, who can wield the sky or space at will, breaking it, wrapping it, and so on. But this character is never really acknowledged by some powerhouses such as Yuta or by Gege, the author, as wielding a Gojo tier level technique. Things that do seem to rival Gojo are either Sukuna or the comedian curse technique, which can bring almost anything someone finds funny into reality. Showing reality manipulation under control can rival Gojo. And the only reason I would say Uro doesn't rival Gojo with this one move is that Gojo too manipulates and moves space and would simply overpower her while she tries to move it about. Gojo's Limitless also consists of numerous attacks as well as Infinite Void that far exceed her capacity to simply wiggle space around a bit. Her moving space around a bit is also not the same as utterly destroying it and ignoring it on a universal and beyond infinite scale that you can argue Goku can do, and potentially even Gojo, which I will get into here soon. That being said, while it may have seemed like a crazy Goku meat writing session here, I had really had to hammer that home that this topic could even happen whatsoever. You'd be surprised how stubborn people can be sometimes. So let's get into the new facts about Gojo that I think you guys will find interesting and just how strong I think he's really gotten. The strength of the Jujutsu Kaisen verse has honestly really exploded just the past few dozen chapters to an absurd degree. They went from hyping up Mach 3 and destroying cities to just some girl crapping out a black hole that could destroy the entire planet, warping time and space in the same arc. There wasn't even really a build up to this level of scaling. This black hole is a technique Kenjaku could survive, albeit the technique was suppressed in a radius due to a barrier erected by a character named Tengen and Yuki Tsukumo, the girl who created the black hole. Yet Kenjaku thinks if he wasn't hugging Sukuna's leg like a child when Gojo got out of the prison realm box, he would have been killed instantly, showing that the spatial manipulation that Gojo does is probably beyond that of a black hole to an immense degree. Or it could be referring to Kenjaku's fear of being hit by maybe infinite void, but I'd be, and so would many others, be surprised if Yuki's strongest attack was stronger than Gojo's strongest attack. It's not impossible, but you get the idea. It should also be noted that during the Yuki fight with Kenjaku, when she does make the black hole, she seems to manipulate the very concept of mass itself. And while translations differ, this can be referring to how the concept of mass works on herself while she's manipulating weight and other things, but it doesn't seem to be truly infinite or unbeatable, with a black hole being its apex from what we've actually seen, with manipulating a concept not necessarily meaning being above the concept entirely on every dimensional mathematical scale whatsoever. It could be referring to a grounded version from what we know. In another fight, we get an interesting scene where Sukuna faces off against a revived sorcerer named Yorozu, and in this battle, Yorozu launches an attack that creates a perfect sphere that is infinitely compressed and basically untouchable. When reading this, I did some research and found that the reason for this is that because to make a perfect sphere in reality is pretty much almost impossible. Any sphere you look at, even those generated by computers, have a series of points on it that would make it impossible for it to be perfectly spherical when zoomed in under scrutiny. So to have a true perfect sphere, it would have to have infinite points of contact, which is why it would be infinitely compressed and impossible to interact with normally.
Maharaga,
adapting to the type of technique Yorozu uses, then just punches through the perfect sphere and obliterates it. Now, while this doesn't mean Jujutsu Kaisen is universal or something like that, it does show that
Maharaga
and many of the other characters can actually adapt to these things infinitely. It is not even an exaggeration. This is why it's so insane, and it's harder for the Shikigami to adapt to Limitless and its many forms, as it shows Gojo's precision truly is infinite points with infinities, or dealing with many infinite sets of information when you're learning about it, such as how his infinite void is described, which is just being dragged into Limitless. This may further make it harder to argue for Goku to interact with it in arguments which I'll get into later, but it should be noted, however, there are theorized true spheres in real life, but usually only for types of atoms, which is often debate about even then. Since we're talking about the author here and with the wording used, this girl really did probably create a perfect sphere with infinite points, which is an insane feat that can have a lot of debate within itself. Finally, for the Gojo camp here, there's Hollow Purple, and this is sort of a different way to look at it that I think is interesting, and why it might be uniquely underestimated with certain headcanon. As most of you are probably aware, Gojo's techniques all derive from an engine called Infinity to expand into his curse technique, Limitless, which then has its own categories, with Limitless being to slow or stop things, Blue being to pull things or attract them, Red, which repels them, and then Purple, which is, as we know from the Jump Giga math lecture, seems to create an imaginary negative number within it, which probably creates a void and then removes or deletes things. This is pretty insane for the simple reason that I don't think the ability is as simple as a strong anime attack. If Limitless is Gojo mathematically constructing and altering space and time with infinite precision to pseudo-alter reality, as the only really rival technique is Comedian, which does that, then Purple, while not necessarily meaning Gojo himself is infinitely durable or powerful in terms of his strikes, may be able to infinitely deconstruct things point by point into a negative and imaginary state, thus removing them from existence. Purple is a bit inconsistently displayed and kind of weird, and honestly I kind of question if the author even knows what this technique does most of the time. But I think being hyper charitable in a fight against Goku here is, maybe you could say something like that. Although, like I said, you can kind of sort of easily reject it as well due to its showings, as it seems you can kind of overpower it or are singed by it rather than deleted by it, like a Naruto truth-seeking orb or something. In all likeliness, you can just say that simply because Limitless contains infinite information doesn't mean that Gojo possesses the power to use all that information in every way he wants, even if he could somehow perceive it or the technique contains properties of that level of information. Rather, it's simply the information within it, and he controls some aspects of it at a given time, especially when transformed into a more physical technique rather than trying to comprehend its raw properties. Good example of this is, how does Hollow Purple get to 200% if its ability is to remove things on an infinite scale? Doesn't really make much sense unless it's just referring to size. So trust me when I say that interpretation earlier is very charitable. And infinite information does not mean infinite power or the infinite ability to manipulate said information. Even with all of those, we can see that Goku is still quite a bit superior in terms of attack power. Said maybe if you think Hollow Purple deconstructs on an infinite scale with infinite points within that infinite scale, then it turns to negative. Not likely. But even then, a very important factor to remember is that Gojo manipulates space and time on a normal scale and plane that Goku is simply above to begin with. With it being confirmed, this is what Gojo is doing in the Jujutsu Kaisen movie, which was then confirmed to be canon, as well as stated in the manga as well. Goku is completely above the time-space of the normal 3D universe, and manipulating it even hyper-precisely doesn't matter if he is still just above it. Think of someone who can make infinite points out of a square, and then draw infinite numbers between those infinite points on the square, and then in this example, Goku would just sort of be a cube. You can kind of see where I'm going with that. Even Gojo surviving his own Hollow Purple he takes immense damage from, and it has a weird burning effect. And this could simply be to Gojo being able to manipulate space around him with high precision, but it shows Hollow Purple has a few extra qualities other than precise removal from existence that also dampen my headcanon wank attempts to make it sound cooler for the video. That being said though, this battle won't hinge on an AP or like a beam clash type finish anyway. It will mainly hinge on a few factors, mainly being speed and durability. That being said, how fast is Gojo anyway? In terms of speed, JJK is pretty abysmal, with many higher-ups hardly being able to react to Mach 3, Hikari, a higher-up needing infinite cursed energy to react to an electric discharge and still lose an arm doing it, and with people like Kenjaku barely being able to react next to a suppressed black hole that light can't escape from, and Gojo doesn't really have a lot to work with in terms of upscaling from those guys. At best, if you really wanted to be hyper-charitable, which I've been doing a lot of that in this video, you could say that because he could perceive things and move inside of the prison realm seal that has no physical time, that he may possess some type of inaccessible speed that can move so fast he can move even if there's no time. Or you can say that because he can manipulate space and time himself, that perhaps it's different for him. But even if you do grant that, you can say the same about base Goku, who mastered Ultra Instinct and many others surpassed millions upon millions of times. It's even worse if you think Goku can somewhat travel to the future, such as in his fights against Hit, and way worse if you think things like the Dragon Ball Afterlife transcending dimensions means actual higher mathematical conceptual dimensions and not just it literally being placed higher than the living universe in Dragon Ball in terms of location, which would make Goku completely unstoppable by anyone who has to even interact with the concept of space and time to begin with. But I personally don't agree with this, as the skepticism and just saying it can be referred to location is simply too strong of a criticism. I'll be getting more into Dragon Ball upgrades and what I think about that type of stuff in the future on my channel, and some of those higher interpretations actually do scale to a lot of characters that you'll find very interesting, so be sure to subscribe, because while some crazy arguments floating around don't maybe apply to Goku, they might apply to some other people. So that being said, Goku in all likeliness here, if he's bloodlusted and full power, would sort of just slam through Limitless, punch Gojo in the head, and he would sort of explode like Cell did in the Super manga that one time. But if Goku was in character, there are more things to consider. If he's in character, he'd probably let Gojo try some tricks out, such as his Infinite Void. In MUI, it is possible that Goku actually avoids Infinite Void entirely, and this may seem kind of absurd, but a domain expansion actually has a speed and an area that is designated for it to appear, with Goku even before MUI being able to avoid attacks instinctually that would have killed him, such as in the Beerus fight when he was Super Saiyan 3, before they could even occur and when he couldn't even sense they were going to happen. He just sort of had this weird instinct where he could avoid deadly attacks that nothing about his body could sense otherwise. So in MUI, he could probably avoid this domain entirely, as a person with no cursed energy is actually not restricted by any barrier of a domain by the technique, and with Goku's far greater speed, reactions to things he can't sense or have happened, he would probably sidestep it. But Infinite Void isn't necessarily an attack, that does physical harm or damage. It's more like you're injected by a bunch of information. So maybe you could argue it's kind of headcanon for him to assume it's like a threat and his spidey senses would have him dodge out of the way. So if it did hit him, like I said, in character, could Goku survive it? I've seen many people try to counter this by bringing up Vegito, and to give JJK fans a bit of credit when they're talking about Vegito turning into a chocolate ball with literally no brain. However, this ability is only unique to Vegito, so Goku doesn't actually possess the ability to be turned into a chocolate ball from what we know of with no brain and survive. This is actually a unique hack that Vegito possesses that Goku does not, and this is actually stated in the Daizenshu, I'm not joking. And while Dragon Ball characters do negate a lot of hacks weaker than them, this is a different type of hacks, and honestly, this ability to negate all hacks is somewhat over-exaggerated by Dragon Ball fans. It doesn't really work in a lot of debate crucible. This hacks doesn't seek to control Goku whatsoever as well. It is simply subjecting him to infinite upon infinite amounts of information. It's sort of like him being teleported into a spot that just so happens to have these properties all around him. So say that if you're teleported into a bright room, you know, you're sort of just seeing these bright lights and it's like blinding you. It'd be like that, but just sort of information going into his brain. So hearing something or seeing something or feeling something is information. So in this case, you don't really fight any power, just your own senses. I've thought about it, and it may be possible to argue that Goku can tell the difference between someone with, say, 1 power and infinite power, and is different, and all the levels in between that. Goku may actually be able to process an infinite set of information and beyond, as crazy as that sounds. But it does seem like a stretch. An infinite void works infinitely, and every infinite within that infinite has its own infinite set you have to absorb. So if there's the letter A in this void, you have to absorb A infinite amount of times, and then everything else in all reality infinite amounts of time. So considering even normal people can apparently be subjected to this hyper briefly or very weaker lower dimensional curses, do you guys think Goku could take it? I'll leave that up to you guys. That's kind of all the information about it. In my honest opinion, full power, this would never even happen. But if it did, I'm curious. I'm a bit more open to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's also the argument of, should we make energy types equal? So in this instance, Goku would get hit by the domain barrier like normal because, say, his ki would just be work like cursed energy. In this case, Goku would probably be also launching off a black flash with every single punch and multiplying his power level by the power of 2.5 times almost every single strike while ignoring Limitless, so that doesn't really help. It also is still iffy if the domain is fast enough to hit him, if Goku isn't like just Gokuing for plot-induced stupidity or dramatic effect like he usually does. And in MUI, this is far less common or likely. Once again, still curious what you guys think. That being said though, guys, that's pretty much everything you need to know except for maybe the Mafuba, but Goku never really carries the tools around to do it, and it doesn't really matter in this battle. Either Goku is really fast, can break through Limitless, and doesn't get KO'd by Infinite Void, or it's a wrap. Mafuba doesn't really change anything. As a little bonus, I've been seeing Kid Buu versus Gojo pop up lately, so I'll go over that just a little briefly. Kid Buu, as most people have brought up, probably wouldn't really care about Gojo and would just blow up the planet. I actually agree with that assessment. That is actually what he does in the story. However, Gojo might actually be able to survive in the void of space quite a long time due to reverse curse technique and his ability to change how space works around him. Although, it also then depends if Kid Buu just blows up the planet and then just starts zipping around the universe and just ignores him. So Gojo's just flying around in space, just until his brain rots away from reverse curse technique. Kid Buu at full power should be able to rip through space like Buuhan and Super Buu. Now, I'm not saying he's stronger than Buuhan. Alright, that's a different debate for a different day, but, you know, they're definitely in a similar magnitude, right? If Buuhan could rip apart the universe, it's safe to say, you know, Kid Buu can at least rip apart a chunk of the universe. However, it's a lot more restricted than obviously MUI Goku, who could just be above it entirely. That being said, even if Kid Buu couldn't rip through Limitless, Gojo doesn't really have anything that could put him down for good unless you hyper-wanked how Hollow Purple works with the ultra-charitable Seth TM version. That's just some headcanon I made up to give it a chance against Goku. Even with Infinite Void, Kid Buu's brain could sort of infinitely regenerate, and Kid Buu can also live without a head. I'm not even making that up. He can just live without a head, let alone a head with a fried brain. You'd have to argue you could fry Kid Buu's brain, and then while Kid Buu's stunned for like a millisecond, seal him somehow. Maybe in a prison realm box. Anyway, this is getting kind of stupid. But it's more interesting than Gojo versus Goku, I guess. Either way, Goku wins pretty confidently, let alone against a giga-wanked version of Gojo, and without a giga-wanked version of Goku. With Kid Buu probably winning too via stamina off, or just blowing up the planet and then just not caring about him while he just dies in space slowly. Or if you think Kid Buu can just vice shout and rip through space with multi-galactic or multi-solar system level force and just overpower the manipulation Gojo can do through space. As one last little note here, because it did get added recently in the JJK manga as this main script and recording was done before the finale of heavy spoilers, plot spoilers, Sukuna versus Gojo, and Sukuna does win at the end, and it is implied and pretty much stated that he cuts through and negates space or existence or the world to negate Gojo's ability and then chop him in half and cleave through him, sort of confirming what we've all been saying for a few years now. Other than that as well, Hollow Purple is stated by Gege in sort of like a chapter breakdown that a way to describe purple is to sort of say it's like crushing space. So the statement that I made of it hyper deteriorating and removing anything it touches to negative is in fact heavily wanked and not implied, as Gojo's Infinity and Limitless seems to just be manipulating space and time, and is confirmed now with the finale of Gojo's life, as well as the chapter ending. Closing off, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my friend Cursed Valor. He's a Jujutsu Kaisen YouTuber on here that has a lot of potential and has done a lot of good deeds in the community lately. He deserves a lot more credit, and it has been a lot of fun debating with him and talking about how things in JJK work while I was making this video. Much love. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for watching.